right, well, let's go ahead and get started. We'll see if other folks trickle in. It can sometimes be small groups again at the end of the day here. My name is Erin Thomas. I am the faculty lead for the Coastline College Competency-Based Education Program, and you've been hearing a bit about competency-based education today. What we are going to be talking about is a very specific form of it called direct assessment. So we're going to spend a few minutes just making sure everyone's kind of up to speed on what that means, and then we're going to dive into how my colleagues and I have worked with industry to really focus on meaningful assessments that help students demonstrate competency of skills that employers are really looking for. So Lori, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Lori Runk. I'm the department chair of health sciences and our OER coordinator at Coastline College. I've been working with Elof, who will introduce herself on the Certified Dietary Manager program, which is a certificate program for our nutrition program.
Hi, I'm Ila Farhat. As Lori said, we have been working together on the CBE for a Certified Dietary Management program. So we're excited to present to you guys about this.
It's a small group, so feel free to raise your hand, jump in if with questions. We're happy to answer them. Again, I'm going to move quickly through this definitional stuff. Hopefully you've heard about it if you're in California, but we're a part of a collaborative of colleges, 8 colleges working together to make our system support the concept of direct assessment, competency-based education, which is a real stretch for how our systems actually work. But we've got a lot of great support from our board of trustees and our district chancellor. And our goal here is really to address a group of working adults for whom our traditional higher ed systems just don't work. So our goal is to make our systems more accessible to that population of people out there that have maybe some college, no degree, or even no college at all, and don't see themselves as college students. And direct assessment is different because we break the relationship between seat time or weeks of a semester and learning. And so the concept here is that a student might bring into the classroom a lot of experience, a lot of skills. And so if they can demonstrate that quickly, great, they can move along. The other end of that spectrum is that not everyone can learn and grasp a great new concept in a 8-week, 12-week, 16-week semester. And so where they struggle, we want to allow them more time. And so the idea is that the students direct the pacing of the learning. They can go as quickly or as slowly as they need to. And the main thing is that they move on in the program by demonstrating mastery of a particular topic. So we focus on competencies rather than how long a person's been sitting in a classroom, how many words they've written, all of those things. But you can imagine that for the infrastructure of a higher educational institution where faculty are loaded based on semesters, we're paid based on semesters, where students enroll based on semesters, financial aid is based on semesters, that this change, this additional modality has proven to be fairly challenging for us to implement. For example, we have the opportunity for students to start every month in our program. And so you don't have to wait if you decide you want to get going until a traditional semester start. That said, you still have to demonstrate your competency before you can move along in a direct assessment program. So this is new to the state of California, at least institutions that are publicly funded. This is not new to the higher education. And so what you see here are lists of universities who are already implementing, who already have the authority to deliver direct assessment programs. And when we say authority, we mean that the Department of Education has authorized these institutions to offer direct assessment CBE programs along with student financial aid. And so there's a fairly high bar to get approval from the Department of Education in order to do that. Coastline has passed that bar, so we were accepted late last year or approved by the Department of Education to offer a direct assessment program. We're now in this process called e-apps acceptance. So we've submitted all our paperwork. We don't have like the final stamp. In other words, we can't yet offer our program with financial aid, but we expect that to come within the next few months. So we would join our colleagues across the country who have already been doing this for quite a while. So one of the things that we have talked a bit about is our focus on students here. And that is who we want to really focus on, which is that population of students. And it's a large population who are of working age and have some college but no degree. That's 36 million people, which is really frustrating because even with the questioning of degrees and what they mean and the questioning of the role of higher education in our society, there's still demonstrated proof that having credentials increases lifetime earnings for folks. So we know that we are not serving this population well. They're probably working with a bunch of other responsibilities. You can see the reasons for why they haven't completed their programs. And so our job in our minds is to meet their needs, meet them where they are. And they are coming. There's a lot of interest in the state of California anyway of upskilling, reskilling. We've got support from government, business to do these kinds of things. And so we are really trying to adjust our systems to meet the needs of this fairly large population. And so I'll let Lori or Elif.
I am.
Great.
Okay. So really for us, and especially in doing a certificate program and looking at the fact that coming out of 18 units in a traditional side, they're getting a very I would say a high wage for 18 credits, but we also wanted to recognize the fact that a lot of these people that are coming to us for certified dietary manager, they've been working in kitchens. And they have a lot of these skills, but there's not a tangible way to give value to those skills on a traditional program. So they're not getting credit for sitting in a classroom on the traditional side, but by breaking these traditional courses apart, and Elif will talk through how we kind of did that in a few slides, but we're able to give value to that learned experience. So it makes what they're bringing to the table validated, and we're able to recognize that. And it's almost a term that many of us are familiar with is credit for prior learning. It's kind of giving them that credit in a way, only they're coming in. And so we're able to recognize that they understood this material. They've been practicing this in the workforce, and they're able to move through things a lot faster. And as Erin was saying, they can focus a lot more of their time on the content that they haven't seen in the workforce. So go ahead, Erin. Next slide. Okay, so that's where we feel like the industry certificates and CBE really are a perfect pairing, because industry certificates are expecting them to have this very focused, skill-oriented, hands-on approach. And really, CBE is asking them to master this knowledge that they're going to take into the workforce. The real-world skill application, and we have performance-based. It's not that they're sitting down and taking a test or completing a homework assignment. They're actually going in, and we've got some examples of some of these assessments where they're walking through a virtual kitchen, and they're doing a kitchen inspection, which they will actually have to do when they get into the workplace, or they're going to be doing clinical assessments with an avatar on the other side that we'll talk about. So the other benefit to this is it can constantly be meeting these changing industry needs. In the case of this certificate, back in 2016, changes at the government level and requirement level immediately increased the need of this certificate being in long-term care facilities and other settings. And this allows us to change with these to meet the demands of these changing responsibilities. So with this, though, it obviously came with a little bit of a challenge, because when you're working with external stakeholders, a lot of these certificate exams require that students have a certain amount of seat time or credit hours in the content prior to sitting for their exam. So when we went, in this case, ANFP is the governing body that's provides the test and the certificate. And we had to sit down with them and kind of walk through this process because they were very fixated on seat time and credit hours that were learned from the student, and trying to translate that and say, well, but if the students already master these competencies and you're talking about competencies, I think we're actually more on the same page than we think. But for us, that meant to remain adaptable. They weren't seeing that. They've kind of just always done what they've always done. And so we had to come to the table and kind of explain how we can be sure that even though the students aren't sitting through X number of hours of classroom time, they're still going to come and be prepared, and probably even more so, because as we've seen in the past, a student can pass your class with a D, a C, some cases, or they can pass with an A. But in this case, mastery, once you know the information, is has more of a guarantee that these students are leaving with this content. And then demonstrating effectiveness. We brought up examples of other organizations that they are well aware of in the same field, such as in nursing or dietetics. And these other programs are already allowing competency-based education as the classroom piece to prepare students to take the exam. So bringing in commonalities for them gave them a reason to pause and consider this type of education program.
So once we have our intent, and again, it's to address and serve these students that we have not served well as higher institutions of higher education, then we get to the how. And what we both started with, and I failed to describe my discipline, which is business, we started with a management associate of science degree. And I already have one of those in my traditional world, but I looked to an industry organization, in this case, a company called OSI, or Organization Systems International, who has been working for 40 years by assessing the competencies of C-level executives, CEOs, CHOs, et cetera, CHROs, CFOs, and they have defined a set of competencies present in those leaders. And so for a management degree, we wanted to create an opportunity for an entry-level management degree. So we took a subset of those competencies based on input from our local industry and our advisory boards, which all of our career ed programs already have. So we already have that industry partnership, and came up with this set of competencies that you see here. One of the things that's interesting is this is color coded by discipline. So again, as academics, we think about discipline in our courses. And I know in my traditional management degree, almost all the courses were in business or management. When I use industry to define what should be in an associate's degree pattern, you see a lot more communication studies classes. So it was embarrassing to identify the fact that I have not required communication studies classes in my management degree, when we all know that that is an absolutely crucial foundational skill for a successful leader or manager. So this is one way where using industry to define our program at a very high level sets us off on the right path. So we could assess all we want, but if we've been teaching the students not the right content, they're not going to be successful in the workplace. So I'm very confident that we've got the right content now, and we've got some really cool tools to assess that we'll talk about later. So that was the process. So the other challenge with this direct assessment and working with industry is that how these programs look is not cookie cutter. So you can see I've got competencies here, 17 of them mapping back to specific courses. An element of our grant requirement was that the student leave our program with both a competency transcript and a transcript of traditional coursework. And so there was a mapping process that took us a full year, honestly, to come up with. But these are the courses that the student will end up with. That process worked for us that way. And then I'm turning it over to Elov to talk about how it works very differently in their world.
So our program was completely different to develop just because upon graduating from this certificate of achievement, the students can sit for their nationally accredited exam to become CDM, certified dietary managers. So for that reason, it's like a lot of other healthcare professionals or any degree that requires to take a national exam, you have to follow very specific guidelines that they provide. funny enough, so this is the information that we used when we created the traditional program, Certificate of Achievement. So if you look at it, you notice that they use terminology like competencies, behavioral indicators. This is what we use to develop the courses to teach the students. Now, when we go back, Lori described how we had to talk to them about it and how we actually use the same terminology. We had to go kind of undo all this and go back to developing, instead of having them all into courses, now we're looking at them again into competencies, but we're making sure that the students can master every single competency. With the direct assessment, we need to make sure that they have performance-based assessments that can make sure that they actually mastered every competency of that. So for us, we didn't do like Erin, where we had to go back to the industry and get specific competencies that they think they should have. Instead, we had to follow these specific set of guidelines. Can you go next slide? This one here is a visual for the visual learners. It shows us how we came up with the mapping for our courses. The navy circles, these are our traditional program for our Certificate of Achievement. And you can see that there are 8 courses. Most of them are three-unit courses, except for the work-based learning courses. The blue circles, these are the competencies. And we have them mapped into this way. This way you can see that upon completion of for example, principles of nutrition, the students can find on their transcript that they also completed this course, the FN 170. So it just helps us see which courses map to which competencies. But we also what you can see here is that not all the competencies are the same size as a course, and not all of them are one-to-one. For example, with the FN 190, which is food service management, you can see that it has 4 competencies. Obviously, these competencies are a little smaller when you compare them to principles of nutrition, which is a much larger competency that is kind of like a 3-unit course. So just competencies can be different. They can be large competencies or small competencies, and they can translate into one course, or a group of competencies can translate into a course.
And I'll just share, our colleagues across the state are all grappling with this challenge. My colleague at Southwestern College is creating an automotive associate's degree, and they're basing that on ASE, Automotive Service Excellence standards. And that complete program has over 500 competencies. And so they've mapped those 500 competencies into logical groupings of coursework. Again, while we believe that competencies are the future, we know that today coursework, certificates, degrees is the currency of education. And so it was really important in our grant program, important for the state, for us to provide the student with both of those transcripts. So that mapping process is a really crucial step if you're looking towards defining a competency-based program, a direct assessment competency-based program. Any questions at this point before I jump into how we created these programs? Yeah.
Yes, so I'm very like process based, so it would be helpful for me to know, did you like look at outcomes in these courses and then you like matched to the competency? You were like, this competency, check, 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 matches.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and I breezed over that process for my program alone. That was almost a full year because I had to include all of my general ed faculty and non-discipline faculty. And we started with a hypothesis. We think this competency ties to this course. And then we looked at the behavioral indicators for each competency and the course objectives and SLO for each course. And we said, is there alignment here? And normally that alignment is around a topic, and a content topic. We discovered some gaps. We created 3 brand new courses in the program because we did not have a math class that was appropriate for this. We had a math for liberal arts class. We didn't really have a math for kind of career ed. So that was a new class. We identified 2 different classes in the CIS, the technology space, the computer information space, that we just didn't have. So we created a foundational office skills class. Here's how you use Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, Those are crucial skills for anyone in the workplace, especially a manager. So, and in some places we adjusted our course. So we said, the industry is telling us that these are the competencies. We should tweak our course so that it actually provides those to the students. But that took a year to do that mapping, at least for a 60 unit, associate's degree. It took quite a while.
I think that's where the certificate program was a little bit more straightforward for us. One, we were working pretty much within our discipline, so we didn't have to bring in all of gen ed, but also we had built these courses to meet the same competencies. So we knew they were there because when she showed the rubric with the red column, we knew all that content was there because we built the courses around it on the traditional side. So it was more a matter of just teasing it back out for us and how,
Oops.
I mean, some competencies just naturally fall and there are good, clear divisions, and other ones, it's like this could be one competency that's huge, or it could be three. What actually better serves the students? Like, are there ways to divide it out?
I ask one more clarifying question.
Of
Yeah.
course.
What is your definition of competency versus what is your definition of outcome?
I've been asked that question a lot. And I have come to believe that a competency is simply the highest level order of Bloom's taxonomy. So we've been working in this space. It's really not that new. It's just making sure that when we get to the end, when they're demonstrating that they can apply and do. So there's a couple ways you've seen Bloom's taxonomy, but what I've seen is if you go towards the more sophisticated, you start with know. So can you regurgitate? Show, can you kind of show that you can understand these concepts? But then there's do. And so this is really all about assessing the do. Can you do this? That said, getting to creating our courses still required us to really think hard. And so if we know we're going to be assessing the do, we're at the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy, then we start with our assessments. So we know what the competency name is, we know what the behavioral indicators are, we know what our student learning outcomes are. Build assessments around those things first. Then you start to work backwards. What content is needed, et cetera, et cetera. And so this was again for the management program. We had a lot of content from our partners at OSI. The Polaris leadership model had a lot of documentation. They use this in industry. So they go into companies and they coach managers using all of these tools. So we had that available to us. I used an acronym here called COR for our course outline of record. So we again, ask a faculty member to take a look at their course outline of record, take a look at how we mapped the course to the competency, or be reminded of what the competency is and how it works in the real world, and then create what we call a learning journey. But it's a real focus on assessments because, again, this is not a seat time program. So a student, and again, this is all faculty designed, but a student could come into a course, and we had a real world example of a student who sold software for a living, okay? But he needed to take a presentation skills class. In today's world, he would have to sit through a 16-week presentation skills class. Well, how do we adjust that in the competency-based world where we've broken the relationship with seat time? Do we want that person to just come in and give us a presentation? Maybe. Do we feel that there's some body of work that we want to have demonstrated from the student in order to grant that 3 units of credit? Probably. So we talk about what do they need to demonstrate, but we also talk about what is the minimum path we want them to go through and what's that body of work that they need to have completed in order for us to confidently grant that 3 units, even if it only takes them 3 or 4 weeks to get through to it. Questions about that? Because that turns some people on their heads often. So then we start to work on this learning journey. Again, you can think of it as your course design, but I can tell you that when I began teaching, I was told, here's your book, here's your syllabus, 1 chapter a week, boom, boom, boom. That's how you build your course. This is not how we build courses. This is very much backwards design, where you're really considering what's the smartest pathway through the material. You're being very conscious of, is this extraneous material? Maybe I think it's really cool. Does it need to be known or being able to be used to do the demonstration? You really got to think that through. There's a great emphasis on formative assessments in our programs, and that's partially because of the way the education code was written. But the main teaching happens in the providing of feedback in those formative assessments. So the drafts, the trials of the work of the students doing, of the demonstrating that they're doing. Because in the state of California, the student only has 3 opportunities to do a try at a summative assessment. And if they do not achieve 80% or higher on that summative assessment, then they have to exit the program. We therefore place strong emphasis on making sure those formative assessments are allowing the student to demonstrate their mastery well before they get to that sort of high stakes summative phase. And then here's just an example. So as part of our understanding financial acumen, I go back to that foundational math class that we needed to have as part of our GE pattern. But teaching business classes, I find all the time students who don't have the recollection of how to, or that have ever had the opportunity to do things like calculate a year-over-year percent change. So we have that foundational math class. We then ask them to apply a lot of the concepts that they'll learn in business accounting to their personal life. So this is a personal finance class, if you will. And they're basically putting together a portfolio that is a complete personal financial plan, but they do it in sections so they can submit some of their work, wait for feedback from the faculty member, move on to the next part of the portfolio or of the project, get the feedback, make adjustments, and it is submitting this final 4-element package that is their summative assessment. And that's one way to do it. There's a lot of other ways, depending on the discipline, that people have orchestrated or architected their courses. But the anchoring principle is backwards design. So it helps to try and do this in an environment where folks are comfortable with and have had a lot of experience with backwards design. If you haven't, then this can be quite a leap to get to. I know that some of my colleagues have struggled with things like, I think it's really important to expose students to all these different things. And so we have had to have, conversations about that's agreed. So maybe we can say further reading if you're interested, but we wouldn't, because it isn't defined by or required by the industry, we wouldn't base our assessment on some of that material. It might just be extra material. One second. So again, that whole backwards design, this is just the same content in writing for those of you that prefer to read it, but really focusing on how we're going to measure competency and working our way backwards. So this approach, this direct assessment approach, we have found to be fairly challenging in the sense of it, again, forcing all of our existing systems and processes to really adjust to meet this flexibility that most of our systems don't have today for our current learners. Ours is primarily an asynchronous, fully online program because that's what our working adults tend to need. It changes the model from a sage on the sage to very much a coach or a guide on the side. Most of that coaching comes in the form of the feedback on those formative assessments. So it's a different approach. You have to really think through and design your programs up front very thoughtfully in order to make this work. But we're very excited. We are aiming to launch in June, have our first cohort of students going through, and we have students able to start at the beginning of every month or once a month, if you will, on a rolling calendar. So If you get excited about going back to school, you don't want to wait, right? You want to just do it. So we are making sure that students have the opportunity to do that. I'll take some questions here, and then I wanted to go back to a slide and talk about a few points that I missed.
I have so many questions.
That's fine. It's just us. Go for it.
Okay, so I guess going back a little, when you're thinking about the backwards design, what did you think about when you were designing the essentially the order of operations, right? The order of competencies.
Yep.
What are you going to talk about that later? Because you're going to talk about that later. You don't have to answer that now.
Well, that's what I realized I didn't spend enough time explaining and how crucial this was. So once we defined what the relationships were between the competencies and the courses, then we had to figure out the order. And again, this is a break from traditional higher ed, right? Where we have students and we give them a menu and we say, take these classes and take them whenever you want. If you've been involved in any kind of guided pathways work, you know that the research shows that if we provide a pathway, a logical approach to going through these classes, students tend to be more successful. They tend to complete. So we took that guided pathways concept and put it on steroids. And for at least the management program, and this is not true of all direct assessment programs, I have to say, it's not necessarily true of all programs. It's definitely not in my automotive colleagues program, but for this program, there is definite scaffolding. And so we dictate the pathway through these courses. The student doesn't enroll in courses, they enroll in this program. And they cannot move, in this case, to block 2 unless they've completed both of the courses in block 1. Once they're in block 2, they can bounce back and forth between the courses that are in those in that block. And so they might submit some work for their ethics course while they go back and do other work in the other course. So this is really designed around a part-time student who's taking 2 classes at a time. But there is scaffolding, and we will assume the knowledge and skills of the prior blocks in the later blocks, which allows us to, again, teach the course differently. So one example is business thinking. This is in block 6. So at community colleges, we are open entry. I've taught business thinking, which is our intro to business class. I've had high school students, I've had lawyers, I've had PhDs in my class. So imagine trying to teach to that wide variety of backgrounds. And many of us, especially in community college, spend a lot of time doing the catch up and making sure everybody's starting kind of from the same point. This program design ensures that when students enter that course, they're ready to do things like write, because they're going to do an analysis of a company. They're ready to do some evaluation of income statements because they've been exposed to that in some of the prior classes. They know how to do a year-over-year change percent calculation, etc. So it changes and allows us to streamline the courses that are downstream because we know all those prior skills have been demonstrated.
So then when your students, when you say your students enroll in a program, do you just dump them in one Canvas shell that like has all this built in and then they can't unlock a module until they do the thing, or?
No, we've designed it and we went around, it took us some time to settle on this, but it is one course, one shell per course with multiple sections for students starting over time. So one of the other ways this puts education on its head is that if I am teaching that introduction to business course, I might have some students who just started. I might have some students who are just finishing. I might have some that are in the middle. And so the concept of, oh, it's Sunday, Monday morning, I'm going to be grading assignment number 1 for all my students. That's not how it works. I'm going to be grading whatever anybody submitted on Monday morning. And so that forces us to think clearly about rubrics and to make sure that we can consistently assess assignments, because I have a 9-month contract or a 10-month contract. So even if my students are going to continue, for example, through the summer, I might not be on contract. Someone else is going to step in and teach my course. They need to be doing the assessment and the grading in a consistent way. And so we rely heavily on rubrics to ensure consistency in the feedback to the student.
Sarah, when Aaron was talking about scaffolding too, in the program that we did, and I'm not sure if you're looking at a program that's more of like an AS or AA degree versus a certificate program, but in ours we have the work-based learning, and so that adds another kind of twist to how that gets applied. And so in ours we set it up so that um, as they work through, we have the competencies in a certain order, and after they complete a competency, so for instance, food safety and sanitation, that unlocks after they've done all this, the coursework, the course content related to what they will practice in that work-based learning. They do not have to do the work-based learning right away, because a lot of times when ELAF is finding preceptors for these students, or one preceptor is serving in many capacities. They might do two of the work-based learning sections at the same time with the same preceptor. So the content unlocks the work-based learning as an available module in the case they wanted to get it done or wanted to move through that, but they don't have to, because it also unlocks the next curriculum competency. So it unlocks two at one time, one of them being the work-based learning, but that's kind of optional to do at that time because we know they have the content that they've learned, but if they're going to pair it with another work-based learning because of doing the experience all at one time, they can do that. So I just wanted to like put that out there, that there are other unlock was just the best term that they use, that we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. We're unlocking it so that they can get in if they have a preceptor, or like we said, a lot of them are working in the industry, so they could complete those hours with where they're currently working. And so they can actually get that done while also opening up the next like curricular type of competency. So
And then my colleague at Southwestern College has a more spoken wheel model, because for all of his automotive competencies, the very first thing that they need to do is demonstrate safety in the workplace. And so and then they from there can go to engine work, tires, transmissions, and all of the different areas of automotive technology. But in the traditional world, they have to spend the first few weeks of every single class going through that safety stuff. Whereas in his CBE world, they'll go through that once, and then they can go to any of the modules that they want to. So if they've already been working with tires, maybe they want to go do the tire module, because they'll get some quick wins, and that'll motivate them to continue through the rest of the program. So these programs are very different depending on, again, the industry standard. I think that's one of the reasons why higher ed has such trouble adopting and embracing these approaches, is it doesn't look like your traditional program outline, right, in our in our curricular database systems.
And then I just have another question. I'm so sorry. I have lots of questions. My next question, right, considering the students can come in with a bunch of knowledge, right, prior learning, and they're like ready to move on, do they have to wait for the formative feedback, or can they just breeze through the assignments and unlock the next modules, or do they have to wait to a certain point where you are ready to engage with them?
That's going to vary quite a bit by course, but I can tell you, let's see, where was my, sorry, hurting your eyes. In a lot of cases of business, it's a survey kind of approach. So that's especially true of Introduction to Business, and it's also somewhat true of this personal finance class that we did. So in this case, the concept of SMART goals is one thing. The students can submit their SMART goals and not wait for me. They can keep going and start to work on learning about budgets. Similarly, in my Intro to Business class, we go through, it's a survey course, we learn about HR, we learn about marketing, operations, production, all of those things. And the analysis that they do in each one of those sort of functional areas of a company is somewhat independent of their ability to learn the next. In an English class, it's a little different. There is scaffolding that happens. And so there are cases where you do want to wait and not allow them to submit the next assignment until they've gotten feedback and they've demonstrated that they've read and incorporated that feedback before they submit the next assignment. So it varies, and it varies based on the situation and the class.
It totally makes sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Um, so this work is hard. The reason that Coastline has been the first in the state to receive approval from our local accrediting agency, first to receive Department of Education approval, is because we had a very strong commitment from leadership, and that strong commitment was demonstrated with their pocketbooks. And so a lot of that grant money went towards paying faculty reassigned time to do this work, because it is not work you can do in 15-minute chunks. You really need dedicated time to think through these curricular designs. And I'm very grateful that I was provided with reassigned time in order to conceptualize and execute and design this whole thing, because it's quite different. It's also kind of different way of thinking. So designing curriculum, especially backwards design and really focused on formative and summative assessments, it's a different task than what we're doing day to day, which is coaching students, grading papers, et cetera. And so we would start all of our discussions with a reminder of why we're doing it, and that it's that 36 million people who are stuck and who are going to have stunted growth of their earnings because our system hasn't made it easy for them to attain a degree. So if you remember the student always, you'll find that it comes a little bit more easily. And I had folks on my cross-functional team who can envision people in their lives that were stuck, and even in the leadership roles, these management degrees, where they just couldn't get a promotion because they didn't have a degree, but they had all the skills. So keeping those folks in your head helps you when the work gets hard, because it gets hard. I have to say, we also have benefited from a lot of support from the CBEN organization, so the Competency-Based Education Network. That organization has grown tremendously in the 4 years we've been working with them. There's a book that you see there, which I keep on my desk and I referred to over and over, especially in the first couple of years that we were doing this work. We've got CBEN has provided rubrics to assess your program at all levels, not just curricularly, but also administratively. So there's some great resources, and many of them are free out there to help you consider this. And again, there are various flavors of competency-based education. Our programs are this direct assessment flavor, which is a little bit more rare, partially because of the Department of Education's oversight to make sure that students should be getting financial aid for the kinds of education that they're being provided through these systems. So there's some rigor in their evaluation of that. And then our colleagues in the 8 pilot colleges, we've always shared lessons learned, what we've figured out, what isn't working, what is working. And that's been very, very beneficial. So we appreciate our colleagues in the collaborative as well. And we're way ahead of time. So feel free to ask away questions.
I have a personal scenario question. But let me preface that with a whole nother question. So when you were designing these courses and you were putting them through, you have curricular, I'm assuming you have curriculum review committees, correct? So how did this work with the curriculum review committee?
Yes, so in the state of California, faculty have a lot of control over those sorts of processes. And curriculum is a very local decision. I rather somewhat strategically got elected to be the co-chair of the curriculum committee along the way of this process, so that I could form a task force to exactly evaluate how we were going to do this. The task force, after looking at a couple of other programs, we came up with 2 concepts. One is that a course has a CBE addendum, not unlike many of our distance education addendums, at least in the state of California, which demonstrates how the course can be successfully delivered in a direct assessment CBE modality for a particular program. So that's one caveat that I hypothesize is going to work. We'll find out if it works, but the idea is if this, for example, applied math class, how it works for my management program, it might be slightly different if you take that same applied math class and teach it in the context of, for example, certified dietary management. So that was one thing we arrived at. And the second was that a CBE program would be a different program outline of record. And that was more for our tracking. But it was also because, as you saw in this CBE version of the management degree, every single course was specified. In a traditional management degree, it'll specify the discipline-specific courses. Ideally, some other interdisciplinary courses are being required, but then it'll say, and your local GE pattern, right? And the students could pick whatever. In our case, that's not what we wanted. We wanted very specifically the social sciences to be satisfied by a business ethics course, so we very thoughtfully chose the general education courses that would meet the needs of the degree itself. So I have two different management degrees. And I will say, one of the other intended goals of the grant was to apply some of the things we've learned from this to our traditional programs. And so I have edited my traditional management degree to require communication studies classes, because obviously that's a key element of a manager's skill set.
Perfect. Okay. Let me give you my friend scenario. So I have a friend who works in a community college and is an assessment person. And they also have to be on the curriculum committee by choice. And as their role on the curriculum committee is to review all the outcomes and provide feedback. And so let's say this friend encountered a class that was just looked like a regular typical class. And so they provided the feedback, and then they got in the curriculum committee meeting and was told it was CBE. And then they asked the question, wait, how are you making the CBE? And the faculty member got very defensive and said, I'm going to ensure that they meet the outcomes. And it's like, okay.
Well, again, there's multiple flavors of CBE. So you can't take a competency-based mindset into a traditional 16-week class. And it sounds like that's what was happening here.
Yes. And so currently it is our business program. So I'm glad to know that there are, a way to maybe direct them and provide them some resources to think about when they're offering their class. I can do that. I can say, hey, when you're assessing this class, you might think about these competencies, make sure you're hitting them. Here are some external resources you can use. So I'm so happy that you were in the business area. And I can approach it from that standpoint. And I did not mean to put this person off, but the course is just being called CBE because it's open-ended. The student can take it as many times as they want, 3 times. And yes. And so I'm trying to find a very tactful way to say that's not necessarily CBE in a traditional CBE sense.
That is true. That is not a traditional application of competency-based education. The retaking part.
But it could be. But then she doesn't want anyone to look at the class. So I don't know how to express concerns without being able to look at the class.
Right. Well, if you're on the curriculum committee, you should be able to see at least the course outline of record.
Yes. Yep. Have that.
And our course outlines of records provide some examples of assessments, how we might be assessing.
Ours do not.
That's a challenge.
That's a good idea, though.
Yeah, I would recommend that. And again, faculty in California have a lot of freedom, and so a faculty member could say, just make generic statements about how those SLOs will be assessed or how those learning objectives will be achieved. But those of us that are really focused on supporting students know that we really want to help them by doing meaningful work that's going to help them in their careers, etc. So not busy work assignments, but real helpful assignments.
Yes, I guess that's my concern. I just wanted to ensure, but I should also trust. So
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the only other question I have, because again, I have a curriculum background, is this credit, non-credit? What is the financial aid implications for that retake?
it's credit.
Okay.
And since it's not a CBE program, it's only a CBE course, it is financial aid eligible under the program heading.
And when they say take it 3 times, would the student be eligible for financial aid all 3 times? Would they have to have failed the first time in order to be financial aid eligible?
No, so my understanding is that they just remain in the course shell
Hmm,
through 3 semesters. So
wow.
they have a 3 semester ability to remain in the course, and they just keep getting forwarded each year.
Oh, so if I were your chief instructional officer, I might be worried about a loss of revenue from that, but that's me. Because instead of so the instructor is going to be teaching 3 semesters worth of instruction to that student, but potentially only being reimbursed from the state for 1 semester.
Correct, but we pay that instructor 3 times. Absolutely.
Well, that's a conundrum. I will say I didn't address the faculty staff model very much here because we have not completed our contract negotiations on that. There are some sort of standard practices in the CBE world of having assessor faculty who are the coaches. So assessing the formative assessments, often separated from a person coming in and observing and assessing the summative assessment so that you have some objectivity in that assessing because we all get to know our students and love them and we just want to help them, right? Which is exactly what we ought to be doing. But if we are truly wanting to demonstrate competency, then you really do want to have some sort of an objective assessment of that demonstrated behavior.
Yeah,
So
and I've seen a lot of models that are performance based, right? So what percentage are your students based at a certain point in time? And then that's how they base the funding model.
yeah,
Interesting, but cause
yeah,
as well.
yeah, I'm glad I don't have to deal with that I leave that to the deans. We have a few minutes. We could show you this group a demonstration of some technology we're using to do more authentic assessments. We could show you our virtual kitchen. Um, any preferences to what folks want to see?
Erin, if you have the immersion one, why don't, because that one seems like it's so applicable in different disciplines. I feel like that one might be the most helpful in the short amount of time we have.
Sure.
Um,
I'll just set it up. So I had one of our advisory board members offer to be a student in a virtual avatar-driven assessment scenario. She leads a team of customer service personnel, and I have to tell you that this is the capstone assessment. This is at the very end of our program, so these students have been well prepared for the scenario we're throwing them in. My poor advisory board member wasn't. She hadn't received any of the training or any of the learning that would be behind this, and she still did pretty darn well. But so the scenario is demonstrating the competency of influence because the company has decided to extend its customer service hours beyond the traditional 8 to 5. She's got a team of 3 people, and now she's got to try and get some folks to come early or stay late. And I'm starting it in a few minutes early just so you can get a sense of what's going on and the kinds of concerns that her team members had. But this again, it was one actor, real time, with a very kind of scripted set of if this happens, then that happens, responding to a person in real time.
I appreciate you guys taking time out of your schedule to come meet with me. Wanted to let you know that we've had a few little changes in regards to scheduling, and wanted to first of all make you aware of those changes, and wanted to give you guys the opportunity to figure out if you want to participate in some of those changes.
Uh,
So, yep.
no, sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So Gabe, that's you,
Yeah,
right?
yep.
Hi, Gabe. I know you've worked at the company for a while, and so some of this stuff might be new, but everybody has had sort of their set schedules. And so I just wanted to let you know that the company executives have determined that we want to really remain competitive. You know, it's a difficult market out there. And they believe that our customer service hours need to be extended. And what that
What does
means,
that mean for us?
exactly, that's exactly what I'm going to talk to you about today. So it would require that employees be able to work late up until about 9 o'clock p.m. Okay. And then also have the opportunity to start early at 6 o'clock in the morning. So really it's just an extension of operating hours, but obviously that would impact everybody's schedule. So really the purpose of the meeting today is to encourage you to think about what that might mean for your schedules. I know you have obligations outside of work, but want to give you the opportunity to see if changing your work schedule would be of interest to you. So I want to give you the opportunity to do that. Because it is important that we make those changes. And we're trying to make those changes as soon as possible. So what do you think about that? And do you have any questions for me about it?
Well, I mean, it sounds like you guys are just asking us to do more work than we're currently doing already. Are you able to hire new people or just a different team to cover those extra hours? I mean, it sounds like you're asking us to do a whole extra shift.
We're not asking you to do an extra shift. We're just asking you to fluctuate your hours and either give you the opportunity to start earlier or work later.
All right, so it wouldn't be extra hours, it would just be a different schedule than normal.
Correct. Or at least, yeah, correct.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm not really able to come in later. I have to pick up my kid from school. You know, I've got to be there at home with him.
So you kind of get the idea of this truly being a real world scenario where the student's going to get off the cuff responses that they're going to have to react to in real time. There'd be an assessment that would be done of this video, and that would be sort of the grade they would get is how did they do in this scenario. And again, this was a scenario that was very, very challenging. This person just got thrown into it, but there'd be a lot more prep work behind it. But that's just some of the technology that's out there to do these sorts of things that didn't previously, exist in the last few years.
Yeah, what is the technology that you are using for that?
It's called Mursion, Mursion. And it is not cheap. It's but the decision was made that we would use some of the grant funds that came with our grant to buy a few of these scenarios. And so the other thing to know is that this won't be the first time in our program that the learner experiences this kind of an assessment. So they will have they will have done this in a couple of classes prior to this. So they'll be much more comfortable with the platform in general by the time they get here.
I think Susie's giving us a gentle, it's 3 o'clock with her.
Okay.
Thank you. But Sarah, if you have follow-up questions, I don't know, I think they sent the slide out, but if you want to put up the last slide there just for a minute.
Yep.
So that if you wanted to get emails, we're happy to answer questions.
Yeah, perfect. Thank
Before
you.
we get the crook that pulls us off stage.
Let's see.
Or I could type them really fast.
There we go. And yes, we will be providing the slides. I have to do some work on accessibility to make that happen, but we'll do that for sure.
I got them. Great. Thank you.
Okay, sounds
Thank
good.
you, everyone. Have a
Thank
good
you,
evening.
everyone.
I think we're heading back to a closing session anyway. Thanks, guys.